All right. What is going on, everybody? Welcome back. It is currently what is it? 7:06 p.m. Central Time, Thursday, February 15th. Uh Super Bowl recap. So, I got some thoughts about the Super Bowl, obviously. I'm going to start with Kansas City because I want to start a trend where we start with the winners of outcomes. We're in a new era of the NFL. It's pretty obvious. I wrote on my blog a couple of years ago when Brady left New England, like we were truly entering a new era of the NFL at that point, and I had like a five-part series just chronicling, what this next era is going to bring. And one of the posts was who's going to be the next dynasty in the NFL if, now that New England's done. And the most obvious candidate at the time was Kansas City because they had won the Super Bowl uh, in 2019. That was Brady's last year in New England. And it felt like the most likely because you had Andy Reid, great coach. You had Patrick Mahomes, looked like the best quarterback in the game. Uh, and now we are truly seeing that come to fruition. They've won 3 Super Bowls in 5 years. They've made 4 appearances to the Super Bowl in 5 years. And my immediate takeaway is I don't know how you stop this team. But I don't know where the end is coming. Like for New England, it was clear, Brady's not going to play forever. Patrick Mahomes isn't going to play forever either. But, and, I'm going to save that for later. I want to talk about the game itself. And it was a very surprising start to the game. I picked Kansas City to win, but San Francisco took it to them for about, I'd say 2.5 quarters. It was well into the third quarter before I thought that game started to turn. I've heard, I'm sure y'all have heard the same thing. The game turned at that muff punt when I almost said Clemson. Kansas City punted it back to San Francisco, and I forget the returner's name, but he fumbled the punt. He muffed the punt. Actually, it hit another San Francisco guy, his foot, and the guy, instead of jumping on it, tried to continue with the ball for whatever reason. Just a bad decision, and Kansas City got it, and the game changed right there. I actually texted, might have tweeted it too, to James moments before that because I didn't Kansas City get a turnover right before. I don't remember, but I texted to James that the momentum of this game is turning before that play even happened. And literally, let me see if I can find that tweet or text. Momentum. I'm going to search momentum. Yeah. So I texted him. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. That's a different text. Uh, I texted him at 8:21 p.m. my time. I said, "Do you feel that? That's the momentum shifting." And then 8:24 he texted, "Holy shit." And I said, "I sent that before the muff punt at 8:24." So 3 minutes, so I have it on record there. I was on the money. But again, my immediate impression is how San Francisco took it to Kansas City for 2.5 quarters, really. And like, I was shocked when it was 10-0. I forget when that happened, maybe early second quarter. I was like, uh oh, like Kansas City's in trouble here. And then as it went on, well into the second half, I kept thinking it still feels like San Francisco's dominating this game, but it's not showing up on the scoreboard. And I kept thinking to myself, you better start scoring some points now. You better start scoring some points. You better start scoring some points. You're not going to be able to keep Patrick Mahomes to 3 or 6 or whatever it was. And it felt like San Francisco was dominating, but the score was 10-6 or 10-3. And I was like, this is still a 1-score game. And obviously the game turned at that muff punt. Kansas City ended up going on a run. And the last few possessions that Kansas City had, I think they scored on their last 4 possessions, and 2 of them were touchdowns. And they probably would have scored on one, but they had the clock ran out. or was running out, and they had to kick a field goal at the end of regulation. So just really surprising the way that. No, I shouldn't say I'm surprised that San Francisco dominated the game. They were dominating in the trenches. They were getting after Mahomes. They were getting pushed up front. I'm still surprised that Kyle Shanahan didn't try to run the ball more. Kansas City's defensive front, well, Kansas City's defense wasn't great against the run, but it was in this game, I will say. So maybe that's why Shanahan bailed on the run, because it wasn't working. I think Christian McCaffrey was held to 80 yards, and I don't even think he averaged over 4 yards per carry. So very unlike San Francisco's offense, and I just wasn't thrilled with the play calls. And granted, give a ton of credit to Steve Spagnuolo, the defensive coordinator of Kansas City. He had a great game plan, and it didn't start that way. Like the first couple drives, even though they didn't lead to many points, I was like, holy shit. Like, Kansas City better be figuring this out, because I sent it to James. It was the first 5 drives led to 10 points. San Francisco was averaging like 6.3 yards per carry, and Brock Purdy was averaging like 8, almost 9 yards per throw, and had about 100 some throwing yards on 14 attempts. It was, they were getting after it. They were just coming up short with penalties, or McCaffrey did have a fumble early in the game. They were just shooting themselves in the foot. They could never score that other touchdown to give them a 10 point or 11 or an 11 point lead, which is what they needed. And just credit goes to Steve Spagnuolo. They settled in after those first 5 drives. And then the rest of the game, I sent it to James. They scored 12 points on their last 8 possessions, including overtime. 12 points, and I think they averaged under 5 yards per play, which is really bad. Like, average in the NFL is around 5.5. They were almost to 4.5, like a whole yard differential there. And then, they shut down the run game. I thought Brock Purdy looked great starting out. And he's definitely not the reason why they lost this game. But he looked flustered in the second half. They were starting to get pressure on him. And Kansas City's secondary was excellent. Trent McDuffie in particular. Like, Trent McDuffie had an argument to be Super Bowl MVP. They ended up giving it to Mahomes. I don't really have a problem with that, because Mahomes put the team on his back. But Trent McDuffie was excellent. And I think that was another thing. I've texted James. I was like, why is San Francisco throwing the ball too much? And he said, especially with the way Kansas City's secondary is playing. So Spagnuolo was excellent. Like, just Kansas City, man, they are inevitable right now. And that's kind of been their theme all postseason, is that these guys are inevitable. But this is truly, again, now I'm going to get into what I was talking about earlier. This is truly, like, I don't know what's going to stop this team from winning more games. Like, New England stalled because the first part of New England's dynasty stalled because they had, a lot of their defensive guys who are now in the Hall of Fame, like Ty Law, Richard Seymour, about to be Rodney Harrison someday, but I'll get to the Hall of Fame class here in a minute. But those guys started getting older, and they had to retool the team. Brady was still there, but they had to revamp eventually. And then the second part of the dynasty, whole new team, except Brady. And now I've forgotten where I was going with that. And then Belichick took over as general manager. And he's not a great drafter. He has his hits, but he's got quite a few misses too. A lot. I mean, you can pick apart a lot of GMs and their draft history, but Belichick isn't great. But with Kansas City, you don't have that. Andy Reid's not in charge of player development and player personnel. He's the head coach. Brett Veach is the general manager, and he's probably the best general manager in the business. He's done a great job the last 2 or 3 drafts of getting good players. Nick Bolton, Creed Humphrey, Leo Chenal, Trent McDuffie, George Karlaftis. Like, he has been Isaiah Pacheco. He has been nails. Rashee Rice in the draft. He's been nails. And then on top of that, you have one of the greatest head coaches of all time, one of the best offensive minds of all time, who is coming up and entering, I don't want to say his prime, but his career has entered a whole new level because the game has changed and it's become more offensive because of the rules. So you've seen him be able to be more effective because of these rule changes. And then on top of that, you give him the most gifted quarterback probably ever to play the game on his team. So you have these 3 to 4 people, Mahomes, Reed, Brett Veach, who are all like at the top of their game right now. And then you bring in Steve Spagnuolo, who is, I mean, he's still pretty young. He's 64 years old. I mean, that's not old necessarily. He's been a head coach before. He's bounced around. He's been an NFL assistant forever. And the thing is, he's not going anywhere. Like, I don't think teams are going to line up to hire a almost 65-year-old defensive-minded head coach in today's NFL. So again, like, you have these guys at the top of their game right now. I don't know what slows down this team. I really don't, looking ahead. As for San Francisco, I don't really know what happened. I would say I don't think they lost because of Brock Purdy. I thought he played okay. He struggled down the stretch, but in the 2 drives where he was asked to do something, he kind of delivered. Like, there was a moment in that second half where Kansas City had all the momentum, and they had taken the lead after that muff punt. And Brock Purdy and the offense go down and score a touchdown and take the lead back. And then, overtime, that was a decent drive. It stalled, and they kicked a field goal. But, he made some plays even in overtime. But yeah, for the most part, it wasn't great the last 8 possessions of the game. But that's not why they lost. I think they lost because, and I'm not blaming him. I'm not saying he's a choke artist or anything. Kyle Shanahan didn't make the best decisions. Probably should have leaned more on the run. There was an instance, I think near the end of the game, where he threw it on 3rd down instead of running it. If you run it on 3rd down, even if you don't get it, you burn some clock and, don't give Mahomes as much time. Because that was one thing I said near the end. My mom texted me and said, when San Francisco took the lead, she was like, "Oh no, not San Francisco," because we were both cheering against them. And I said, "Mom, there's so much time, because didn't Mahomes get that ball back with like a minute 50?" I was like, "There's way too much time." And Kansas City kind of took their time going down the field. They had some key, 3rd downs that helped, sure, but San Francisco just made some bad decisions defensively. And then this leads me to my next point. I don't quite get the reasoning for firing Steve Wilks. He's not really the reason why you lost the game. But it's clear that him and Shanahan didn't really see eye to eye. There was a moment in overtime where Shanahan had to call a timeout because he didn't like Steve Wilks' call on a 3rd down, I believe. So I feel like he's being portrayed as the scapegoat, that he's an idiot. Steve Wilks isn't an idiot. He's been a head coach in the NFL before. Didn't work out, but he's clearly not stupid. And now you just get to the point where with the 49ers, can they get over the hump? Can Shanahan get over the hump? And I'm convinced he can, but with this core, this was probably their best shot. I've been saying that all offseason. Like, the pressure has been on them all offseason, and they've delivered. They didn't play that well in the playoffs until the Super Bowl. And even in the Super Bowl, they, trailed off down the stretch. They were kicking Kansas City's ass for 2.5 quarters, and then they just ran out of gas. Mahomes took over. So it's not an indictment of Purdy. It's not really an indictment of Shanahan. It's just the other team was better, had a better quarterback, better head coach. That's what wins games these days. But in terms of the future with San Francisco, it really does feel like the end of this Super Bowl window. I'm not going to say it's the end, but the window is closing. I read that they have several players who have a cap hit over $20 million in 2024. Deebo Samuel is one. I think George Kittle's the other. Might have been even more than that. They have quite a few players, who are getting paid. Now they can restructure that, but you look at that roster and just these guys are going to be another year older. And they've been around a while. In 2024, Christian McCaffrey will be in his 8th season. Fred Warner will be in his 7th. George Kittle will be in his 7th. Like, that's when guys start losing steam. Even that Seattle Legion of Boom defense, they all kind of came up in 2010, 2011, 2012. But by 2017, that defense was done. Like, this can drop off quick, and for some guys, 7, 8 years, it's not uncommon for them to lose a step. Because you're really good doesn't mean you're going to play in the NFL for a decade at a high level, I mean. Once 2018 happened, that Seattle defense started going downhill, and that was their 8th or 9th year. And these guys are approaching that on San Francisco's roster. They have some tough decisions to make. Now, that's why I'm not ruling out this team winning a Super Bowl next year. I think they'll be really good. They'll be a contender. They don't have to pay Brock Purdy for another year. But that day is coming. They're going to have to make a decision there. And I've heard some people say that, you got plenty of time. Well, you really don't, because you got to pay him after the third. If you're going to keep him, you got to pay him after like a year before he's a free agent. And he's not a first-round pick, so he doesn't get that 5th-year option. So after his 3rd year, if they're going to keep him, they're going to have to sign him that offseason. Or go into year 4 with, his status in limbo like the Giants did Daniel Jones. And, that could work, but it's not really what you want. You want to keep your quarterback happy. And then once you do pay him, depending on how much, there are going to be cap casualties. One guy they got to pay is Brandon Ayuk, who I think does have that 5th-year option for 2024, so he'll be fine. But it certainly feels like San Francisco's best chance is now out the door. And that kind of makes me happy because I'm a Green Bay fan. I hate San Francisco, and I was openly cheering against them in the Super Bowl. So those are my thoughts. I'm not sure. Oh, overtime. So let's talk overtime rules. I originally thought I knew that they changed the rules. I didn't really know to what extent. I knew, like both teams are guaranteed a possession, which I'm like, thank God. I don't know how long it took for the NFL to fix that. So guaranteed, regardless of the first possession, that both teams get a possession. And I originally thought Shanahan's decision to want the ball first wasn't ridiculous. I thought, did it matter? Because both teams are guaranteed a possession. First possession, if you go down and score a touchdown, you set the tone of what the other team needs to do. You put the pressure on them. I didn't think it was that big of a decision. Or, that big of a deal. It's certainly not why they lost the game. And it's getting a lot of traction. But then you hear the audio that has come out, and it's not great. Like, Kansas City was clearly prepared for that overtime. San Francisco was not. You can find the audio through the NFL at halftime of the coin toss before overtime. And Shanahan says to Fred Warner, who went out there, like, we want the ball. And they win the coin toss. Fred Warner says, we want the ball. And the ref says, are you sure? And he says, yes. And then they jog away, and Mahomes is jogging back to Kansas City sideline. He's kind of like, they wanted it. He's Andy Reid's kind of like, what? What's going on? And Mahomes is just like, I don't know. They wanted it. And the entire Kansas City sideline like erupts almost. They're like, hell yeah, we want them to have the ball. And then the worst part was when San Francisco about to jog on the field. Kyle Juszczyk says, wait, they get a possession? I didn't know that. They're guaranteed a possession, whether or not we score a touchdown? I didn't know that. Not a good look. And that's an indictment of coaching. And that's why Kansas City's so good. That's why Andy Reid's so great. They were clearly preparing. They've been preparing for this moment. They knew that if a scenario arose in the playoffs where they went to overtime, they would be prepared. And they were. And that's part of the reason why they won. So I've gone back and forth. I think that it's a pretty bad decision by Shanahan. At first I was like, what's the big deal? Now I'm like, it's not so much it's a bad decision, but it's clear his team wasn't prepared. And again, it's not why he lost the game. His defense was that, well, if we had scored a touchdown and they had scored a touchdown, we would have had that third possession to take the lead and win. And well, Kansas City shot that down and said, well, we were going for two regardless. And that does kind of really poke a hole in Shanahan's reasoning for getting the ball first. Well, the other team could go for two and you lose. So it's a good point. And it probably has changed my mind of Shanahan's decision. Again, not why they lost the game, but don't take the ball first. It's probably better, even though if the other team scored a touchdown and it puts the pressure on you, I'd rather know, I think you would rather know what you want, what you need, I should say. If you need a touchdown, that's going to affect your decision making. If you need a field goal, that's also going to affect your decision making. I don't need to go all the way down the field. What are my best plays to just kind of dink and dunk and get me in field goal range? So those are my thoughts on the Super Bowl. It was a really good game. Far from one of the best Super Bowls I've witnessed. But it had a really good ending after a subpar start to the game. Really good ending. So I'll wrap it up there on the Super Bowl. I wanted to touch up on the Pro Football Hall of Fame class for 2024. And I got to pull this up because I don't remember all the inductees. So the inductees, for the most part, I don't have an issue with the list. Where's the class? Class of 2024. To enshrine 7. So here's the thing with the Pro Football Hall of Fame process is that it's easier to tell in baseball who's going to get in. Now, baseball, the writers can be unpredictable. But for the most part, if a guy eclipses 70% of the vote and just misses on the 75% needed to get inducted, he's likely getting it the next year if he's eligible. If he's not eligible, obviously he is off the ballot. But usually, if you eclipse 70%, you're getting in the next year. Football is not like that. You got to reach 80%. It's done through a committee, not through the writers, and the committee is comprised of former players, league executives, media writers, you name it. And so it's a little tougher to predict. Plus, they got to trim a list of almost 20 finalists down to a minimum of 4 inductees or a maximum of 8. And it's just hard to tell who gets in, who doesn't. And for the most part with this class, I don't have a problem with it. So first, Dwight Freeney, don't have a problem with it. Dwight Freeney was one of the best edge rushers of his time. Randy Gradishar, I don't know how to pronounce his last name. He was a senior finalist, deserves to be in. Leader of the Orange Crush defense of the Broncos in the 70s and 80s. Won Defensive Player of the Year. I'm good with that. Andre Johnson, one of the best wide receivers to ever play the game. Steve McMichael, he got in as a senior finalist. I'm good with that. He was part of the 85 Bears team, a really good interior defensive lineman back in the day. Julius Peppers, first ballot Hall of Famer. I knew he'd get in this year. He ranks top 5 in sacks. Probably the best player to play for the Carolina Panthers. That was a no-brainer. And then Patrick Willis got in. And I'm not surprised Patrick Willis had to wait a couple years. He retired early, but he's a no-brainer to be in the Hall of Fame because he only played a short time. I think he played 8 seasons, maybe not even that long. And he still racked up almost 1,000 tackles. He was the leader of one of the best defenses I've witnessed in that San Francisco team, which was loaded up front in the front 7, and he was the leader. So I'm good with that. The one inductee that I have a problem with is Devin Hester. And this is going to be an unpopular opinion, but it's true. Devin Hester, I know he was dynamic, but he shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame. And I originally, when he was first on the ballot a couple years ago, I originally was like, yeah, get him in. And then James honestly talked me out of it. And he was like, and it's the same opinion I hold today. He fully swayed me. If you're not good enough to play either side of the ball with his skill set, and by all means, he was fast, he was agile, he was one of the best athletes of our time. But if you're not good enough to play on either side of the ball, like meaningful snaps on either side of the ball, you shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame. He played 8 times a day, like 8 plays a game. Maybe he was a kick returner and a punt returner. And here's the other thing. In terms of kick return yards, let me pull it up. Kick return yards. And I know he was more of a punt returner, but kick return yards, Devin Hester ranks 12th. And then in punt return yards, where is he? He ranks 3rd. So he's not even the most glorified kick and punt returner ever. And he's in the Hall of Fame. He's 12th in kick return yards and 3rd in punt return yards. Now, kick return yards for a touchdown, where does he rank? 9th, tied for 9th. And then punt return yards for a touchdown. He does rank 1st. But with 14, he scored 14. Hang on, let me look at kick return yards. I read he scored 31 touchdowns in his career. That's way too low to let this dude in the Hall of Fame. He had receiving touchdowns. Okay, so he had 14, 19. He had a little over 30, I think 35 total touchdowns in his career. He had 3,000 receiving yards in his career. And then he did have close to 11,000 return yards. But come on. If you're not good enough to play meaningful snaps on either side of the ball, you do not deserve to be in the Hall of Fame. I can't believe they let Devin Hester in over some of these other guys on the ballot. Let me look up some of these other guys on the ballot. Or on the list of finalists. So Eric Allen didn't get in. I got a problem with that. Jared Allen didn't get in. I really have a problem with that. And then Antonio Gates. I thought Antonio Gates was going to be in. He's only the best probably tight end ever. Him, Tony Gonzalez, top 2 right now. Travis Kelce still playing. Rob Gronkowski, most complete tight end. But in terms of receiving tight ends, it's probably Antonio Gates and Tony Gonzalez. And then probably Travis Kelce 3rd. And then I'd put Gronk somewhere in there too. But Antonio Gates didn't get in. That's a travesty. I'm sorry. Rodney Harrison, only I think maybe a 2-time Super Bowl winner, maybe 3. No, I think he's 2-time Super Bowl winner in New England. One of the leaders of that great defense. Corey Holt, really good wide receiver. Fred Taylor's an interesting case because he doesn't really have the accolades, but he has the numbers. And he ranks in the top 20 all-time in rushing yards. If he doesn't get in, I don't have a problem with it. But in my opinion, he should be in. Reggie Wayne should be in the Hall of Fame. Him and Corey Holt, I had this argument with James a couple years ago. He argued neither Holt or Wayne should be in the Hall of Fame. I argue that they should because, yeah, to James's point, they started as number 2 receivers, but they blossomed into number 1s. Once Isaac Bruce retired, then Marvin Harrison retired, Torrey Holt and Reggie Wayne became the number 1 wide receivers in the offense. So, and then Darren Woodson, who is a 3-time Super Bowl winner, one of the best defensive players on the Dallas teams of the 90s. You know, Deion Sanders and him are probably the 2 best. So, I knew Devin Hester getting in the Hall of Fame was likely inevitable. I wouldn't have voted for him. But the fact he got in over some of those guys is a travesty. And it's a joke of the committee. I don't like criticizing, people who decide this process, but this decision, makes me think the NFL Hall of Fame or the Pro Football Hall of Fame is becoming the Hall of just good, not the Hall of Fame. And Devin Hester, I just don't think deserved to be in. Good player, really dynamic. No one impacted kick returns like him, which you could argue he should be in the Hall of Fame. But if you're not playing meaningful snaps on either side of the ball, you shouldn't be in. To James's point a couple years ago, do you think Tyreek Hill couldn't do what Devin Hester did? He absolutely could, but he's too valuable on offense. If Devin Hester was valuable on offense, and think about that. Think about that. No one had his speed in his time. No one had his agility in his time. And he still couldn't play meaningful snaps on offense or defense. That's a major problem. And we're going to get this dude in the Hall of Fame. I take real issue with that. College coaching carousel news. I got to move on or I'm really going to get worked up. College football coaching carousel news. So Boston College hires Bill O'Brien to be their head coach. I don't really have a problem with that. I'm a Bill O'Brien defender. I think he's a better coach than people give him credit. He had some success in the NFL with some bad quarterback play. His downfall in the NFL was when he became the general manager of the Houston Texans. But overall, he didn't have a horrible tenure as head coach of the Texans. He even has a decent track record in college. I think he was at Penn State for 2 years. Let me look it up real quick. Bill O'Brien was the head coach at Penn State for 2 seasons. And I believe he had a winning record in both seasons. He was 8-4 and 7-5, so not great. But he inherited the Penn State program that was coming off the Jerry Sandusky scandal. So it was a mess at the university at the time. They had players transfer out. They had a reduction of scholarships. It was a mess at Penn State. And he managed to win 8 and 7 games in back-to-back years. And he had success as an offensive coordinator. I know it didn't go well in New England. Mac Jones isn't a good quarterback. I don't think this is a bad hire by Boston College. I really don't. And I believe he's from that area. Let me look it up again. In college, it's so important about where you're from and being a cultural fit. Yeah. So Bill O'Brien's he was born in Boston, grew up in Dorchester, Boston, played at Brown. So I think this dude is a great fit for Boston College. Whether or not he can recruit, I don't know, but I don't think this is a bad hire by Boston College. And then UCLA head coach Chip Kelly leaves UCLA for Ohio State. In the moment, I was pretty shocked. I thought, what the hell is going on that, wanted him to leave to be to take a demotion to be the offensive coordinator at Ohio State. And I originally thought maybe Ohio State paid him because UCLA is going through a tough financial time. That's why they left the Pac-12 for the Big Ten. The Pac-12 was struggling financially. The Big Ten was not. And they were coming off COVID, which impacted a lot of athletic departments. And I thought that has to be it. And then the more the reports have come out, the more it sounds like UCLA didn't like him. Chip Kelly didn't try at UCLA, which kind of buy. They weren't recruiting very well. They were involved in the transfer portal, but it was pretty clear that Chip Kelly had mailed it in. His best year was 2022, and I think they only won 8 games. It was a while before he had a winning season there. So, good for Ohio State, I guess. I still think Chip Kelly is a decent offensive mind. I don't think he's a fraud. I disagree with John Middlecoff. John Middlecoff, who I like a lot, but he says Chip Kelly is a fraud. I don't agree with that. But it's clear that he doesn't want to be in college anymore. He tried hard to get one of these NFL jobs. He wanted out of UCLA, and Ryan Day gave him that option. We'll see if it works out. Ryan Day and Chip Kelly go back all the way to their days at New Hampshire. But I do think John Middlecoff has a point. I do think Chip Kelly has played out. He's not what he was at Oregon. I don't know if that offense isn't working anymore or what, or if he's just lazy with recruiting, maybe a little bit of both. But he's clearly not the coach he was at Oregon. And he's going to use this job at Ohio State to try to get back in the NFL, but I don't think the NFL is ever going to be interested. He wasn't great in the NFL, and his offenses didn't really work. You know, they weren't terrible on offense when he was in the NFL at Philly, but he had some pretty good offensive players. LaShawn McCoy. Now I'm blanking on the other players, but they had some decent players, and always a pretty good offensive line in Philly. But this, I was just really surprised by this news, and the more the reports come out, the more I'm like, good, you know what, good for UCLA for pushing him out the door. As for Ohio State, you better hope it works, because Ryan Day, if he has another year, which I'm not a proponent of firing Ryan Day because I don't know if Ohio State's going to be able to find someone better, especially now that Kalen DeBoer's at Alabama, which I'd heard is who Michigan and Ohio State wanted if their coach, if Jim Harbaugh had left, which he did, but Kalen DeBoer was already hired at Alabama by then. And if Ohio State had moved on from Ryan Day, I'd heard they both wanted Kalen DeBoer, and I think that's why Alabama snatched him up. I just don't think Ohio State's going to do better. But if it's another year where it's subpar, and for subpar Ohio State, that's winning 10 or 11 games, not going to the Big Ten championship and losing to Michigan again. Not impossible. But if it's another season like that, I think everyone's out the door. And I'm not sure you're going to see Chip Kelly probably in college football again. I don't know if he'll get another job as an offensive coordinator in college. I don't see him going back to the NFL. I think Cliff Kingsbury has more value in the NFL than Chip Kelly does, even though Chip Kelly was the better NFL head coach, I guess. But Cliff Kingsbury is a much better offensive mind. He had success at Arizona, offensively. I think the front office also hurt him because that front office wasn't great. But he developed Kyler Murray into a pretty good player. And I just don't know where Chip Kelly goes from here if this doesn't work at Ohio State. Probably back in the booth, which I believe is what he did after being fired by Philadelphia. So I think that's going to do it for me. I don't know what else I can talk about. The new EA Sports college football video game, I did want to touch up on that, is coming out. I'm really looking forward to it. They posted a bunch of stuff this morning. They posted a teaser trailer, which didn't really get a whole lot of information, but it's a teaser. It made me excited. They released some photos. It looks beautiful. I'm really looking forward to that game. So I'll leave it there. I'm sad that our football time has come to an end. I don't know when I'll podcast again. I think I can get one out next week. I had some ideas today for an episode. But I'm sad. I'm a little sad football's over, but I'm also a little relieved. I keep up on my blog every week. I need to start keeping up on this podcast every week. But I keep up on my blog every week during football season, sometimes 4 or 5 times a day, or 4 or 5 days a week. And I was a little excited that Super Bowl was over and I only had a couple more blog posts before I could take a break, and I have from the blog a little bit. And don't have to worry about that for a while. I'll have sporadic blog posts throughout the off season, but looking forward to it. I'm going to enjoy some downtime, and I'll enjoy the draft process. I know James and I are going to have some draft stuff this off season. And my immediate take on the draft is loaded at the top with offensive talent. And not that if you need defensive talent that it's not there. It is. This is probably the best defensive or the best draft we've had in 3 or 4 years since that 2020 or 21 draft, depending on your taste. I would say the 2020 draft was really good. 2021 not so much, or I don't think as much. But I think this is the best one since that. It's loaded at the top with offensive weapons, but you're also going to find good defensive players. I really like the way the board is going to look, I think, for Green Bay in the first round, because I think you're going to expect 5 quarterbacks in the first 15 picks, give or take, and on top of like probably 3 pass catchers. No, 4 pass catchers if you count Brock Bowers. That's 9 of the first 15 picks are offensive players, not counting offensive linemen. I think you could see 3 offensive tackles in the first 15 picks. That's 12 of the first 15 picks on offense. So that means we're guaranteed, and some of those aren't top 15 players in the draft. So that means Green Bay is guaranteed probably a top 15 player at 25. And I'm really looking forward to that. We could really use it. Help Jeff Hafley, the new defensive coordinator, out. So I'll leave it there. I think the UFL starting up, so we do have football, I believe, this week. Let me look real quick. Dead air. More sports, maybe. UFL schedule. I'm just going to look up UFL schedule. Nope, I'm wrong. Saturday, March 30th. So, all right. We got to wait a little while, but nothing we can't handle. All right, everyone, enjoy these next few weeks. Again, I'm sure I'll have some content to talk about on this podcast. Maybe I can get James to hop on. Baseball starting up, basketball, in the heat of basketball, March Madness is around the corner. So we got some stuff to talk about. So I'll leave it there. Everyone, have a good weekend.